Hi, okay, so what I'll do now is I'm reviewing this creative writing piece called it's on a topic which is an image of I guess the past, present and the future. So what I'll do is I'll read through the story for each paragraph. I'll do a commentary afterwards and then I'll do an overall commentary right at the end about this writing piece. Um, So let's start. This is actually not in words, so any notes that I'll make um, will just be above it. Okay, so I looked at the signboard again. I couldn't believe it. I've been given a second chance. Tomorrow, today, or yesterday. The future, present, or past. I can choose to live in either. I started thinking what I could do to change my present. I couldn't think of one, so I just chose the future. Okay, I guess what I'm reading from this as a big picture view is that you're saying that you've been given a signboard, you can believe your luck, you have been given a second chance, or you've been given a chance to actually change something or I guess jump time. Um, and so you chose the future. I think we need to make that clearer. There are some issues with tenses, and I'll highlight what those are. So I looked at the signboard again, I couldn't believe it. I have been given a second chance today. The future, present, and past, I can choose to live in either. I started thinking on what I could do to change my present. This doesn't really sound correct. That's something I would change. I started thinking what I could do to change my present. That's something I would definitely change just to make things a bit simpler. I'll just highlight that for you. And then I couldn't think of one. I guess the phrase would be I couldn't think of anything. So I just chose the future. Okay, here I just chose is a past tense. I couldn't think is a different tense. And then I started thinking, it seems like there's a lot of jumping with tenses and it's not really it's in order. I would change it to something like, and there's a lot of telling. Oops, let me just make that. Let me just make that larger. Guess my computer's not wanting to work tonight. Okay, like that. So things here we should note are, so avoid telling the story. Okay, this is sort of what's happening here because I looked at the signboard. You're telling me what's happening. I couldn't believe it. Again, you're telling me what's happening. I've been given a second chance. Again, we really have to, I guess, get the description in, and that's a very important part of creative writing. So, I guess the signboard appeared before me. Um, a surprise, but very welcome. I'd been waiting for this second chance for a while after such and such and such. So you have to fill those things in. Tomorrow, today, or yesterday were the options I was presented. Um, and I would not include that I started thinking about what I could do to change my present. I couldn't think of one. If that's what it ends up with, I would actually omit that section altogether. I know in another previous creative writing review, one of the advice I gave was one piece of advice that I gave out was that with creative writing, it's important to know what to include and what to exclude. So what you exclude is just as important as what you do include, because when you exclude something that has no, I guess, that doesn't add value or even detracts from your writing piece, you would then be improving that writing piece. So that's a really important skill to develop as well. Sorry, that's a really important skill to develop, because I guess when you include things that aren't important to your story, you then take away from, I guess, the flow, and that impacts negatively on, I guess, your the overall story, and then also your ability to earn marks in the exam. Okay, so let's move on from that. Um, as I closed my eyes and slept. As I opened my eyes, I was staring at the sky. Okay, what I would do is, do you need to say this? Do you need to say, I closed my eyes and slept? How does that have any relation or enhance your story? Okay? The goal here is try to keep your creative writing as concise as possible, um, in a way where you would um, see it flow really well. Okay? If it doesn't have a relation, if it doesn't lead to this main event, um, I would exclude it. Okay? If it adds to the main event, the build up towards the main event, I would then include it. Okay? So the next part here is, as I opened my eyes, I was staring at the sky. I coughed and pulled myself up. Again, the coughing is this really necessary? And pulled myself up. There was debris everywhere. As I looked into the horizon, full stop. Okay. I patted the dust off my pants and sighed. Earth was destroyed. Buildings were fallen and broken. Again, this is a tense issue. Buildings had fallen. The tense issues, to be honest, they're really important issues, because if you get your tenses wrong, because tenses are, I guess, the building blocks of what you would call a house being the creative writing piece. If you get these building blocks incorrect, so in the past, present, future, you've got a house that's sort of a creative writing piece. If you look at the analogy of a house, you've got a house which has, I guess, your living room built in the 1900s. You've got a futuristic looking bathroom. You've got a country style bedroom, and you've also got, say, say a living room that's made of straw and just looks like a shack. If you go into that house, you're going to be very confused, and that's what happens with tenses. So tenses are really important, and if I guess if tenses is quite something that's challenging, my recommendation is to read lots of books, because you'll get a feel of what tenses are appropriate when. Okay, so Earth was destroyed. And why is there an issue with tense? Because you said it was destroyed. Buildings were fallen and broken. Buildings had fallen and broken. Oops, not has. It should be had. Okay? Buildings had fallen and broken, because had is the past tense. Why do we need to use that? Because you said destroyed. Destroyed is in past tense. There was no civilization in sight. And when you say there was no civilization in sight, that is also past tense. Okay, so what I would do now is I would change, I guess, the first part of the second paragraph, and I'd also look at tenses. Tenses is really important. Next part is, I started walking slowly. I then heard a noise. Again, this is all telling the story. Okay? It's really crucial to get this idea of describing and showing what happens, because this is where the marks come. This is where you gain marks within the exam. This is where marks are gained. Okay, I started walking slowly. I then heard a noise. Again, this is telling the story. I bent down and, yep, so these little things here, like instead of an, it's and with a D. Um, you would know that. However, within the exam, it's so easy to, I guess, not pick up on these things because you're so under time pressure. So these are things you do during your 1 to 2 minutes. And picked up a metal rod and held it close to me. I shuffled closer to a wall and stopped. Again, these things like shuffled closer to a wall and stopped, picked up a metal rod, unless these things add to your main event, um, you know, they shouldn't be included. I heard another noise. This time it was growling. It sounded like a dog. Is it a dog? Then heard footsteps too loud. Too loud. The earth started moving. Okay, too loud would be T double O instead of T O. However, that doesn't seem like correct English. I would say it sounded like a dog. Full stop. I then heard footsteps so loud that the earth started moving. I moved back. Again, do you need to say I moved back? But if so, you need to explain or you need to show why you're doing it and why is it adding to the whole story. Then I tripped over a rock. Okay, again, this is information that you have to ask yourself, do I need this? Don't describe every single event that happens because it doesn't become creative writing. So let me illustrate for you. Say if I wanted to write a story about doing the selective exam this Saturday. If I wrote about waking up, having breakfast, and then walking to the exam, and then tripping over a rock, and then perhaps going to sleep and waking up the next day, talking to a friend about a TV show I watched, and a whole bunch of other things like my printer breaking down and then I fixed it. A lot of people, the reader would be confused because they would go, well, what's the event here? What's the point? I'm telling them a bunch of little events that have no relationship to the exam. However, if instead of saying all these things, I would say, I'd bring up a few things such as I studied last night, was really worried. What did I study? I studied a few number of things. I'd list those things out. I hated maths, or this is such a challenging exam. My mum tried to correct it and then she couldn't correct it, and then I was stressed out. A whole bunch of things like that that lead up to the exam. The day came. You don't need to say, I walked there, my dad drove me, he drove at 100 kilometres an hour, although that would be quite funny actually. But something like, instead of saying all those, I guess, irrelevant events that lead up to it, you choose the ones that are most relevant and the ones that have impact. And then when you get to the event, you could say something along the lines of, the day had come. I was now sitting on the desk with the exam paper in front of me, black and white, numbered 1 to 60. So you don't even need to say all the stuff about, getting there, falling over. That the By just saying I was now there with the 60 pages in front of me, that's enough to say that, okay, we've now arrived at the main event. Okay, so I guess that's what I'm trying to illustrate here, that we need to get away from, I guess, this telling, and we need to do a bit of showing. I know one of the other stories I've just corrected as well, a creative writing piece called The Grass is Greener on the Other Side. The student who's written that has done a really good job. So if you want to have a look at that, you can see how he's sort of chosen the main topics and then expanded on that, and that's a really good example to see what other students are producing. Okay, so I then tripped over a rock. The footsteps stopped. I felt my heart beating more than ever. I wanted to run, but my legs couldn't move. My instinct told me to stay still. I saw a huge tail. It moved stared at me. Okay, so I think it moved and stared at me. It was a Tyrannosaurus Rex. I got a shock. I wondered, how is there a dinosaur in the future? What happened here? I stayed still for a while. It soon turned and left. I moved only when I couldn't see it. I was safe for now. Okay, so having let's look at it overall. What I see this story in a nutshell, when I read a creative writing story, I want to be able to explain exactly what it's about within one sentence, um, and have the whole story sort of merge into that one in a way. In this case, there's a lot of telling as opposed to showing, and that really takes away from the whole story. I also don't exactly know what the main event is because there's a lot of things that happen, like tripping, seeing a Tyrannosaurus Rex, but then nothing really develops from the Tyrannosaurus Rex because he leaves. So, and then there's a dinosaur in the future. It's hard to know what this story is about. However, given this, there could have been some real. You could have chosen one major event within the planning that could have held you in good stead without this writing piece, throughout this writing piece. So, if I were you, I'd plan it. Planning is really important, and your main event I would have chosen being a Tyrannosaurus, a T Rex in the future. Okay, so the story is about the wonders that you can encounter in the future. Okay, so that's what you should really be focusing on. And at one stage when I was reading through this, I wasn't actually sure if we had traveled to the future or not because I, you closed my eyes and slept. As I opened my eyes, I was staring at the sky, but it wasn't clear that we were in the future. So even though you said I just chose the future, I wasn't clear what had happened and or when it had happened. So that's a really important part to bed down. So you can see here there's a few issues. I think each one should be addressed individually, and I know there are a lot, so I'll provide you maybe with a roadmap on how to address them in the, I guess, in the quickest way possible. But note that some of these issues, such as tenses, they're not issues that can necessarily be fixed up within, say, a few weeks. From my experience with tutoring, something like tenses takes probably over, if you want to be ambitious and read nearly every day, I would probably say 3 months at the minimum, or even something like 8 weeks. And then if you're doing it on a regular basis, reading, say, 2 times a week for maybe 2 hours at a time, I'd say a good year would help you solidify your tenses. So yeah, that's one of the challenges, but it's not a challenge that can't be overcome with time. So the first part is tenses. So read books, okay? Become familiar. The reason why I don't advocate something like tense exercises, find the tense of this letter, find the tense of this letter, is because whilst that is a great activity, it's very difficult to then apply that in practice when you're writing a story. It's just easier, and you also develop other skills when you read books. The other issue, but the other challenge I see would also be in planning. You need to plan your writing piece, and you really need to build up to this idea of a main event. Now that I think about your story, I think there could have been potential for it to be a fantastic story, because what you're doing, if your story is about the wonders you can encounter in the future and being a Tyrannosaurus Rex, you could say things like the past merged with the future, because obviously Tyrannosaurus Rex is something in the past, um, and so it's like a warped time zone. So it could have been a fantastic story if there was a bit of, I guess, more planning around it, and I guess a clear main event. The other thing I think um, you should focus on developing the skill of is in this thing of showing rather than telling. That's really important because it it pretty much forms the basis of excellent creative writing. Whilst you can pretty much recount a series of events with, by telling, creative writing is, I guess, one step above the idea of a story. It's creative in that, you're coming up with something new, um, but it's also a lot about describing um, and creating an atmosphere. And that's what showing does as opposed to telling. So that's the other third thing that I think you really need to focus on in relation to this piece. So hopefully that's been useful for you in terms of I guess, a roadmap, um, and hopefully all goes well for this Saturday. And yeah, so and I hope you don't stress out, because I know I would be very stressed out if just because the exam is so close, and I know a lot of kids put pressure on themselves quite a bit. So best of luck with the exam, and hope everything goes well. Okay, so